and there's going to be people that continue to join. So, welcome. Thank you for being here. My name is JD Messenger, and I am the executive director of the Do More Good movement. And our mission at the Do More Good movement is to educate, empower, and amplify people that are doing good. And it's an honor and a privilege to be amplifying Dr. Stephen Post, who just so happens embraces the same values and virtues that we believe in. Um, the Do More Good movement was founded by Jay Wilkinson, and I'll just share a quick view of the website. I dropped that in for those of you that don't know who we are. And we have conferences, the ROI of Y conference. We have scholarships, and we do activities and events to amplify people like Dr. Stephen Post, because our values and virtues are promoting purpose-driven leaders who are doing well and doing good, who believe that kindness and empathy and compassion are all the essence of what makes a great leader and a great good leader who not only does well but does good. So let me introduce Dr. Stephen Post. Stephen is the president and co-founder with Sir John Templeton of the Institute for Research on Pure Unlimited Love. He's the director of the Center for Medical Humanities, Compassionate Care, and Bioethics at the Renaissance School of Medicine at Stony Brook University on Long Island, and he has spent more than 40 years researching cultural transformation and the integration of scientific research, philosophy, spiritual principles, compassionate care. And his book that is coming out, Pure Unlimited Love, The Science and the Seven Paths to Inner Peace. I've had the honor to read it, and it's an absolute beautiful book. And the forward is by the Dalai Lama. So without further ado, Stephen, thank you so much for being here, and the show is yours.
Well, thank you, JD, for having me. I'm grateful to see you again. It's been a while. As you say, we met about 19 years ago, and time flies. I think we both look a little bit older.
Yeah.
But let me share. This is a presentation which will allow lots of interaction, but it's not an interview. It's not quite an active dynamic podcast in the ordinary sense of the word, but JD wanted me to actually present some of the core ideas of the book, and yet that does not preclude anybody from interrupting at any point with a thoughtful question or comment. So the name of this book is Pure Unlimited Love: The Seven Paths to Inner Peace. And let me see if I can get this going. Yeah. So what is love? That's a pretty important question. And I take this definition to heart. It's actually influenced by a psychiatrist, Harry Stack Sullivan, whom I knew at the University of Chicago. When the well-being and security of another is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so, you love that person. Notice there are no ancient languages involved in this, but just imagine how you feel when you're meeting an old friend who's had a hard time at Starbucks for a cup of coffee, or talking with someone who's had a hard time in life and really wants some forgiveness. When you envision this, it seems to capture pretty much every situation. And I come to work, I actually work at Stony Brook University, and I have boundaries, strict boundaries between the university work and my institute work. But I don't talk about love very easily at work, because most people wonder, what are we talking about? The love of chocolate, the love of designer jeans. But we always, if we do an effective leadership job, and this is JD's interest too, how do we apply love? How do we make love real in everyday life? So this is my wheel of love, which is the basis of much of what's in this book. Carefrontation, compassion, helping, forgiveness, gratitude, creativity, loyalty, listening, celebration, respect. Carefrontation is not my term. I actually was given that term by M. Scott Peck, who wrote The Road Less Traveled. Scotty was a great friend, and he'd gone to his medical degree at Case Western, where I was for 20 years. We didn't actually overlap, but we became pen pals. And he wrote me one day and he said, you've got to have a notion of love that really allows you to confront people who are getting off course in their lives. They're not sticking with their values. And so he said, why don't you take the word carefrontation, which is in The Road Less Traveled? Anyway, in case you're wondering, that's where that comes from. He was a great guy. And what is pure unlimited love? Well, I have a friend here who used to be the chair of family medicine, Jeff Trilling. And I said, Jeff, what do you think pure unlimited love is? And he paused. He's very pensive. He said, it's it's what you see when you close your eyes in this world for the last time, hopefully. I like that. Hopefully, it made me laugh. He's a great guy. And I just will say that we wrote a major article in the Annals of the New York Academy of Sciences on remembered experiences of death with the head of resuscitation sciences there, whose name is Parnia, Sam Parnia. And that was actually cited more frequently than any article in 22, 23. And I think that's what Jeff is kind of getting at, that if you believe that kind of thing, and some of you may not, uh, it is a sort of palpable reality. And in our study, we concluded that about 20% of individuals who have had these experiences and come back from them actually feel that they encountered such an energy. But not everyone. It's not 100%. It's not even 50%. It's about 20%. But we also did positive psychological surveys of everyone on things like gratitude, forgiveness, kindness, purpose, and that was up through the roof. So when I talk about pure unlimited love, I like to refer to Marc Chagall, my favorite artist ever. And he wrote a book in 1922 after he'd been in St. Petersburg for a number of years. It's called My Life. And I always wondered why he called blue the color of love, which is interesting. Why did he call blue the color of love? Even Picasso commented on that. And this is what he wrote. When he was a young kid, he was in St. Petersburg. He'd run away from home. They lived in a small Russian town, and his father pickled herring. And Dad wanted young Mark to follow his tradition, but Mark felt that he had some greater destiny. So he ran away from home and went to St. Petersburg, which was at the time very anti-Semitic. And he had no money. He wasn't painting yet, but he was sketching on the streets. And this is what he wrote. My means did not permit me to rent a room. I was forced to content myself with nooks and alcoves. I didn't even have a bed to myself. I had to share it with a working man. It's true, he was an angel, that working man with the very black mustache. He was so kind to me, he even flattened himself against the wall to give me more room. Turning my back on him and my face to the window, I breathed fresh air. It's getting dark. Suddenly, the ceiling opens and a winged creature descends with great commotion, filling the room with movement and clouds. A swish of wings fluttering, I think an angel. I can't open my eyes. It's too bright, too luminous. After rummaging about on all sides, he rises and passes through the opening in the ceiling, carrying out with him all the light and the blue air. Once again, it is dark. I wake up. So the next morning, Chagall did his first major painting called The Apparition, and it was inspired by the Blue Angel. And if you go to the United Nations, the UN windows are also informed by that incredibly deep experience that he had. And if you go to Israel, if you go to the image of the Good Samaritan windows in Peconico Hills, wherever he went. Even the final day of his life, he was in his studio outside Paris and he was painting a blue angel. And he felt that somehow in that experience he had gained his calling. So I'm going to talk a little bit about calling. So this book is about the different forms that love can take. And as you will see, we'll go through this fairly quickly. The first one is may you give and glow. The second, may you heal with kindness. The third, may you follow your callings. May you raise kind children. May you know the one mind. May you cherish the gift of nature. May you honor the spirit of freedom. So this is that great image cover of the of Look magazine by Norman Rockwell. You can see it's got everybody focusing on the positive vision of the golden rule: do unto others as you would have them do unto you. They're using their imaginations contemplatively, mindfully, focusing on that. And I heard him speak about this when I was a boy in New Hampshire. He gave a talk in Concord, and he said, "Do you see the circle in this image?" And I didn't see it, but he said, "Well, it begins with the rabbi's white beard, and then it goes around to the toddler and goes down below and then up on the left." And he said, "That's the energy of love." He said, "I'm not particularly religious, but I believe in a spirituality of love." And then he said, if you capture the energy of that spirit, it's kind of like surfing. I'm almost verbatim now with the artist. If you paddle hard, you catch the wave, and once you catch the wave, all you have to do is balance on the board. So that's what he meant by this, and it's a very profound image. I'm not going to go into it in detail. When I first came to Stony Brook from Case Western in 2008, I got a call from United Healthcare, and they were wanting to do a survey of American adults about their volunteering in the year 2009. This was actually started in early 2010. And so we had about 7,000 respondents. And it turns out that 41% volunteered in 2009 at about 100 hours a year. And if you want to break that down, um, let's call it 2 or 3 hours a week. And what did they say? We gave them positive psychology questions. Did this improve your sense of well-being? 89% said yes. Did it lower your stress levels? Did it make you feel more serene? Like that image we just looked at. 73% said lowered my stress levels. 93%, 92% enriched sense of purpose in life, made me physically healthier. 77% improved my emotional health. 78% helped recovery from loss and disappointment. And there were many other factors that were in that survey. But as a result, United Healthcare began to prorate their payment system based on whether people were volunteering or not. And it's not, by the way, how much volunteering you do, but there's a certain sort of threshold effect. And if you reach that, it's about 3 or 4 hours for older adults. It's about 1 hour for younger adults, for adolescents. It can make a considerable difference. I'm not going to go into some of these studies, but this was really the essence of the first book that I wrote, how good things happen, why good things happen to good people, how to live a longer, healthier, happier life by this simple act of giving. And yes, we do have very significant studies from Stanford and Michigan about how people who are actively helping others do tend to live on the whole a little bit longer.
I'm glad you brought that book up, Stephen, because it's absolutely one of my favorites. I've got it right here. It's always been within arm's reach. Why good things happen to good people. I think I've talked about it for 20 years. I talk about it to the Do More Good movement, and I'm really glad to see. I think it was Nick from Lincoln, Nebraska, shared a picture of that in the beginning in the
Oh,
chat box. So I
nice.
want to emphasize something that I love about you, and that is that you take the philosophical and spiritual concepts and you are substantiating them with science and research. And so, if that hasn't jumped out at anyone in the audience, I just want to I want to, as a spiritual best-selling author and a nuclear engineer math major, I love Stephen for blending the science and the spiritual. So thank you. Keep going.
Thank you very much, JD. And you're an Annapolis grad, and you can drive a submarine, so that's pretty impressive. Right now, I'm very into social prescribing. So the National Health Service in the UK got a hold of why good things happen and made it the basis of the first social prescribing movement in the world. And I worked with them. So what happens there is that uh, in the generally primary care setting, uh, clinical figures have recommended volunteering to patients, and the patients are able to exercise some autonomy and some choice. And this is facilitated in interesting ways, but it's working very well. And now it's spread to 80 countries around the world, including Canada. And now there's a US social prescribing movement. We're having a big national conference in New Jersey in about 2 weeks. So I'm happy to have seen that that became manifest in the medical context. That's what Sir John Templeton always aspired to. And he said to me many times, "See, if you can get this into medicine, it would be wonderful." And this is a little program we had, Harvard and Case Western, and then Stony Brook for 10 years, helping others live sober. This was with adolescents who had addiction disorders, and we measured their helping behavior. We had interventions for them, and we found out that it made a big difference in their recovery. So that's just item one. That's path one. Path two, may you heal with kindness. This is a little quote from Hannah Arendt, a very famous philosopher from Chicago. The death of human empathy is one of the earliest and most telling signs of a culture about to fall into barbarism. I don't think we're necessarily close to that, but we have to be careful. Uh, she talked a lot about affective empathy, which is more basic than cognitive empathy. We can teach medical students how to convey to a patient that they've listened to their concerns by reflecting that back and so forth. But that doesn't mean that there's a real palpable emotional presence that leaves a patient feeling particularly satisfied. So affective empathy is actually deeper. And there's a lot of research, much of which we funded, on the empathy circuits in the brain. The hippocampus is involved, the mesolimbic pathways. I won't go into these things. We funded a lot of research that Paul Bloom did at Yale, where he really figured this out. And so now most researchers on child behavior accept what Rousseau identified a few centuries ago in Emile as the inherent kindness of the child. Now, we may push the wrong button, and that's a problem, but it's interesting. And even now, a week ago, I was at Lincoln Center and I had dinner with Jane Goodall. She introduced the Green Patriarch, the patriarch who just won the Templeton Prize for his lifelong commitment to ecology. And she was there. She gave an introduction, and we sat together at a table. She's such a wonderful, was such a wonderful, wonderful woman. 91 years old. She was in perfect health. And that night she went off to the airport, flew west to LA. And I think you all are aware that she passed away a few days ago. But she was amazing. And she was really important because she changed our attitude toward primates. If I go back to when I was in high school, the assumption was that primates were nasty, swashbuckling, selfish critters without any kind of empathy or compassion. And by her careful inductive observations, some would call that women's ways of knowing, she documented that there are a lot of very positive pro-social features in chimpanzees, and I think by extrapolation in human beings. So I saw this morning, a wonderful image of Jane. Uh,
She also demonstrated for the first time that that a species other than humans made tools.
yes,
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. She was a tremendously incredible woman. So what
Stephen,
are we
can you
talking?
explain the difference again for this layman on empathy, the difference between affective and cognitive empathy?
Well, I'll get to that right now.
Okay.
Absolutely. So affective is essentially emotional empathy. And that is very much present in toddlers, for example, as Paul Bloom has pointed out at Yale and written whole books about this. So they don't have cognitive empathy in the sense that they can really reflect uh, on how they want to operationalize that emotional consideration for the other, but they do have that emotional depth. Now, hopefully, in adolescence, with the right influences, we learn how to operationalize cognitive empathy or perspective taking. We listen, we reflect back. But let's note that there's lots of reports about Nazi doctors in Robert J. Lifton's old book. They were incredibly cognitively empathic, but that did not prevent them from coming in to do twin experiments, uh, which were terribly destructive. They put aside their grandfatherliness and they had none of that affective empathy, or at least it was blocked by in group, out group hostilities, racism, and so forth. So we hope that people have both these forms of empathy, but they don't always have them both. Kindness is much simpler. We speak about gentle curiosity here, just having a simple everyday curiosity, a willingness to ask a patient, so how's it going? How's the family? Doesn't take any training. It's not particularly emotional, but it's a nice habit of being. And then compassionate care is this affective and cognitive empathy in response to suffering with a readiness to alleviate that suffering if possible. It's not always possible. But His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who I've known for many decades, doesn't really appreciate too much what we've done with compassion in the United States, because while we go through these internal exercises of mindfulness and meditation, we don't necessarily associate it with action and the ability to relieve stress, which he says is the essence of compassion in the Buddhist tradition. So then may you follow your calling. This will go very quickly. And for those of you who are artists, you'll pick up pretty soon that I like the great artists a lot. This is Chagall's Good Samaritan from the Union Church in Peconico Hills, the Rockefeller enclave behind Terrytown. And you'll see he also used that circular motion, and he spoke about this. You see the white in the middle of the stained glass window. This takes up the whole back of that Presbyterian church. And I happened to live in Terrytown for 3 years, and I used to go over that Union Church probably every couple of weeks just to sit and meditate. He also did every image of the great and minor prophets in the Hebrew Bible, and so you could sit there in a pew, and you could have your elbow literally touching a great Chagall window. But he is amazing because, as I say, he had to run away from home to be an artist, and he could have been distracted. I guess he could have pickled herring, which is what his dad wanted him to do, but instead he went to St. Petersburg, and the rest is history. And that's my dad's Mercedes 190, which I actually absconded with in my youth because I wanted to be teaching in the Bronx. I was really committed to teaching. I decided I wanted to do that when I was young. But my mother and my father got very upset with me because they said it's too dangerous. And so I had to take a job for 2 weeks in Bill DeBono's lampshade factory in Patchogue between two very large Italian women. And it was fine. They were great. But after 2 weeks, I decided that's it. So I drove dad's car out to West Hampton Beach on Eastern Long Island, met a couple of my good friends, including my gal friend at the time. And I decided I was not going to work in the factory anymore. So I drove west and I drove on Route 80. I drove over the George Washington Bridge and got to the middle of Pennsylvania. And the generator on this old Mercedes, which had seen better days, it broke down just as I was about to turn around and go back and redeem my reputation. So what could I do? It was 4 in the morning. It was dark. There were no telephone booths. So I wrote a note, a famous note in my family history, uh, with a pencil. I took a paper out of the glove compartment and it said, to the Pennsylvania State Police, please return this car to Henry A.V. Post. My dad was the president of Sloan's Furniture Store on Fifth Avenue. Please return this car to Henry A.V. Post, 44 Davison Lane East, West Islip, New York, 516-669-5655, from his son, Stephen, who no longer works in the lampshade factory. And right away, I had my classical guitar and my wallet with 50 bucks in it. I put my thumb out, and this great, huge white truck came by, and a guy named Gary flung his door open, and he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "I'm going west." And he said, "I can get you to Chicago." So I jumped in there, and that was the beginning of my journey. I guess everybody's spiritual life begins with a journey. That was certainly the case for me. And I won't go into this in depth, but I will tell you that I love that Chagall story, because sometimes just be following your callings in life. You don't want to get distracted. You don't want to take a job for a little more money or a little more prestige. You want to stick with it, because that's the way we should live our lives. Fourth, may you raise kind children. You know, I have two kids. They're both grown up now. I'm just very grateful. I had dinner with them last night here on Long Island. And, they're both kind. It's interesting. We did a study. We funded the study out of Berkeley, California. Um, it was a recapitulation and extension of a study that began in the 1920s with preteens, kids who were, say, um, younger than 18. And the ones who identified a purpose in life of contributing to humanity as important, they were healthier and happier 50 years later. They were protected from depression and from some physical illnesses that are stress related. This is a very famous study. It's only one of two studies of an adult cohort over the course of a lifetime. The other one came out of Harvard. And it's really amazing to think about that. That somehow, if you're in the 1/3 of these kids who identify helping others as a core motivation in life, you're going to have not disease free, but a less ridden life, and a happier life. So that's important to remember. I won't go into Paul Bloom's work, but it would take too long. But nevertheless, let's note that hurt kids hurt kids. Um, when you don't have those assets growing up, which are very much transmitted from parents, oftentimes from mothers in attachment, if you don't have that going on, it's not a good sign. Um, we did a study of high school students in Vancouver, and it turns out that the grade 10 students who volunteered 1 hour per week for 10 weeks had reduced inflammation, lower body mass index, and especially for those reporting increases in empathy and well-being, they were showing much lower rates of the likely symptoms of future vascular disease. So I love this work by Thomas Licona, who's a SUNY State University of New York professor, the most famous person ever to be how-to on how to raise kind kids. And he has some great ideas. Have a family mission statement in your house. Maybe, put it up on the refrigerator in the kitchen where people gather around. And if one of the kids gets way out of line, instead of screaming at them, just look at this calmly. We are respectful, we are grateful, we don't hurt others, and so forth. This is really important. It actually has its roots in a wonderful study about a guy who was rescued by Holocaust families, rescuers during World War II, and came to Berkeley and did his dissertation in sociology, interviewing the family that rescued him and many other rescuers. So again, that's important. It's important to figure out how to raise kind children. And this book is filled with how to. Screenagers. This is someone who worked here in the center for 4 years. She was our MD uh, uh, documentary filmmaker, Delaney Rustin. She's now out in Seattle. She did a great video called Screenagers. The first thing that came out that really helped parents figure out how to get some control over their kids who are just locked in to these devices. She's still a very close friend, and she's done a couple of other editions of this. So that's Delaney. She has her MD from Stanford. She's one of the great people. Victoria Dunkley, another friend who did a wonderful book called Reset Your Child's Brain, working with the American Academy of Pediatrics. They put out a whole volume of pediatrics about how you can modify the behavior of your kids. And in this day and age, when we have a lot of, shall we say, nature deficit disorder, that's not a formal psychiatric term, but the young people are so locked into these devices, it's awfully healthy for them to just step away and immerse themselves in nature. So this is a book that Sir John Templeton wrote. It was his favorite book, The Essential Worldwide Laws of Life. I was honored to be asked to write the foreword to it. We were very close for about 15 years until he passed away in 2008. But this is where a lot of positive psychology came from. He wasn't doing science with it. He was doing um, wisdom literature, persistence, kindness, purpose, forgiveness. And we were starting centers around the world, around the country, certainly, but also in Oxford and other parts of Europe and Canada, on how we could, in fact, study these great human assets with the benefits of high-level science. That's Sir John, myself, a fellow named Rick Moody. This is signing Sir John's book in London because he had passed away. And one of the nice things I was able to witness and facilitate was getting Sir John together with Marty Seligman in the Marriott Hotel in Philadelphia, because Marty, the great psychologist of his generation and a great human being, I love Marty. He had learned helplessness in dogs, how it was that you could get dogs so down and out that they couldn't even get up off the floor, and he wanted to shift to the positive. And Sir John wanted a great scientist to work with him. And that summer of 2000, I was at that meeting. George Valiant, Csikszentmihalyi, who wrote Flow, with whom I studied at Chicago, all the great gurus of all these positive psychological qualities, they were all there. And we came up with this book, Character Strengths and Virtues, fully endorsed by the American Psychological Association. And that's, you might say, the DSM of positive psychology. In other words, it's not disease-based, but it's about all the assets that we can develop and how we can develop them with some knowledge of sociology, psychology, and even brain science. So that's really important to me, and it's shaped my life in a very significant fashion. And then fifth, I'm not going to run out of time. May you know the one mind. I'm going to skip through this, but we did a survey, Matt Lee of Harvard, and myself, and Margaret Paloma, who's now deceased, a survey of adults across America. And many of them were not members of synagogues or churched and so forth. But we found out that most of them still had a strong sense of, let me just get back to that. Wait a minute. Yeah, so 1,200 of them were surveyed. About 8 out of 10 reported that they had a direct spiritual experience of divine love at some point, at least once. Half of them said they'd had this maybe several times, and then half again reported that they had had this experience quite frequently. And there was this interesting 10% in the end who said they had this all the time. So they were walking around each day feeling this incredible source of divine love. So there you have it. This is not about doctrine or dogma. It's just about uh, an aspect of human culture and human nature. Um, One example of this, I talked about Chagall, but W.H. Auden, my favorite poet ever, um, he was from the US, but he spent a lot of time in England. And he's writing this while he's teaching at a prep school north of Oxford. And it's a beautifully written piece. One fine night in June 1933, I was sitting on a lawn after dinner with three colleagues, two women and one man. We liked each other well enough, but were certainly not intimate friends, nor had any one of us a sexual interest in another. Incidentally, we had not drunk any alcohol. We were talking casually about everyday matters when quite suddenly and unexpectedly something happened. I felt myself invaded, there's the metaphor, by a power which, though I consented to it, was irresistible and certainly not mine. For the first time in my life, I knew exactly, because thanks to the power I was doing it, what it means to love one's neighbors oneself. I was also certain through the conversation, though the conversation was continued to be perfectly ordinary, that my three colleagues were having the same experience. In the case of one of them, I was able later to confirm this. My personal feelings toward them were unchanged. They were still colleagues, not intimate friends. And this is key, but I felt their existence as themselves to be of infinite value and rejoiced in it. And his life changed from that point on. I won't talk much about Ramanujan and the one mind and how he would be at the foot of his goddess in southern India. I've actually gone down there and visited these locations. And while he was praying, he would get these inspirations about formulas, and he wrote them down in the dirt with his finger. And he would come back a little later and he put them down in a notebook. And there was a great mathematician named Hardy at Cambridge, another one named Littleton, by the way. And they found out about one of these formulas, and they invited Ramanujan to England, and he spent several years there. And if you go to Trinity Library at Cambridge, in the middle of the library is a beautiful glass case, wonderful wooden inlay, and there are the two notebooks of Ramanujan, which many mathematicians, including John Barrow, who also won the the Templeton Prize some years ago. He's passed away now too. But John Barrow felt that most of what we know about the mathematics underlying um, uh, physics, and especially modern physics, comes out of some of Ramanujan's insights, quantum physics in particular. So that's someone who didn't feel that this inspiration was coming from him alone, but that it was part of a larger mind that was working through him. Going to wind up here. So some years ago, 1995, actually 2015, I'm sorry, I went to Bangalore, India, to do a large conference, which I helped organize with the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies. And it was on consciousness. And I was asked to talk about dementia. That woman next to me is the famous Sangeetha Menon. It was filled with great neuroscientists and great Hindu philosophers. And I said that, you can't be certain that there isn't something left there underneath the breakdown in communication in an individual, even with advanced dementia. That was exciting. And a lot of people like to hear that because they were not materialistic in their image of mind. Sir John Eccles, who was my teacher at Chicago, who got the Nobel Prize for figuring out the basic structure of synaptic communication. That, Sir John, um, never believed that mind could come from matter any more than blood could come from a stone. He thought they were metaphysically and ontologically different. And a lot of philosophers of mind these days, it's split about 50-50, would agree with that. So I wrote a book called Dignity for Deeply Forgetful People, which is all about mind and dementia. And this is an interesting book that came out not long ago, The Oneness Hypothesis, Beyond the Boundary of the Self. And then this is from a medical student here at Stony Brook, who was in my small group. We were meeting every 2 weeks, and we were talking about dementia, and he wrote this to me. It was in his last moments that my mother seemed to be rewarded for all her hard work. My grandfather looked at my mother and spoke to her with complete lucidity for the first time in a year. He talked about the old times when he used to walk her to school. Then he talked about me and told her to make sure I kept working hard in school. And the last thing he said was how proud he was of her and that he loved her. The next morning, he was gone. We call that paradoxical lucidity. And I will say that I've been writing about that for long enough. And so that 4 years ago, the NIH, the National Institute on Aging, the NIH, came out with an RFP to have researchers from around the United States study through PET scans and different methodologies these events. And we did a national survey of caregivers, primary caregivers, and we found out that half of them have had these experiences. And for 90% of them, it was inspiring. They were caring for someone who was still there underneath the confusion. And it made them feel that they weren't just looking after a husk or a shell and so forth. Finally, may you cherish the gift of nature. This is something that I helped start once upon a time. There was a wonderful woman in Cleveland who was a billionaire, turns out to be, and her son came back from New York. He'd been at Princeton and then he'd been in Wall Street, and he had a very serious schizophrenic episode. And she wanted to know, what can we do with people like this? And the usual pessimism was all around at the clinics and the like. And we had a chance to talk about Harry Stack Sullivan, who had come to medical school at the University of Chicago from a small town in Vermont. And he had a schizophrenic episode. And Harry Stack Sullivan had to go back to Vermont. In his wisdom, he went to a small town. And there he knew all the symbols in the environment, the steeple on the little Presbyterian church, the mooing of the cows, the voices of the people around him. And in that familiarity, he reattached. Some people think of schizophrenia as a condition of separation anxiety, and some brains manage that better than others. That's why oftentimes these episodes occur when people have left their native high school environment or then their college environment. Think about John Nash in A Beautiful Mind. So at Hopewell, which is a 350-acre former Amish farm that Clara Rankin, now passed away. She was 210 when she died. She was a Christian Scientist. She bought that. And it was devoted to people with bipolar and schizophrenia. And they would come for 6-month periods. It was very philanthropically supported. But now it's supported by many, many healthcare venues. And probably you've got maybe 100 people there at any one point. And they do positive psychological small groups. They talk for a week about kindness. They talk for a week about forgiveness. They might talk for a week about gratitude. And you know what? Studies are showing that they actually do get better. Not entirely, but they get better. And they use much less medications than they would otherwise. They also do pro-social things in the environment. They're out there milking the cows, picking up the eggs from the chicken coop. And this is now the basis of ARTA for the Residential Treatment Association. Believe it or not, there are 80 Hopewell-like endeavors and institutions around the country now. So you look there, it's www.hopewell.org. And I think, I'm very grateful to have been involved with Hopewell. I'm not so much now, but uh, was able to provide a philosophy that combined doing good, positive psychology, and access to nature. Esther Sternberg, famous psychoneuroimmunologist, her great book, Healing Spaces with Harvard, and a study that was done, there are many of these now, at the end of the main line of Philadelphia in Paoli, where matched patients who had a room post-surgically where they had a view of a spate of trees did better in recovery than the ones who had still a window, but just a brick wall, kind of like an alley in New York City. So they had shorter stays, less pain, fewer minor complications, better emotional well-being. This is my hero of medicine, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr. He designed Central Park, and he spent the last 5 years of his life at McLean, which is one of the six sister asylums of the East Coast. He designed them all, and all the big grounds with the flowing hills. He knew that was important for recovery. So he designed Central Park from McLean. A lot of people don't know this. And he said before he died that he hoped that many New Yorkers would come to enjoy and experience health by walking through the beauties of Central Park. They might not know that it was created by a man who had all these challenges, but he didn't care about that. He just wanted them to be happy and to have respite in the natural environment, and that worked well. Finally, may you honor the spirit of freedom. This is an interesting piece of art on the cover of a book by Nikolai Berdyaev, Freedom in the Spirit. So I've never felt that freedom was just understood physiologically, a dog chewing through a leash. Because if you give an animal enough security, enough good food, it will have no interest in that freedom. Um, so I'm a believer that freedom is something of a gift of the spirit, and that's what that image is supposed to convey. Um, in Hinduism, the three key elements of the divine, the supreme being, are love, creativity, and freedom. Something to be said about that. Um, we looked at that. This is my last slide, I think. We looked at that Norman Rockwell image of the Golden Rule. He was fired by the Saturday Evening Post for doing that because he portrayed Ruby Bridges in the lower left-hand corner with her books under her arms positively. And the editors, the owners, only wanted Black people conveyed in trivializing poses. And so they fired him. And then he got hired by Look magazine, thank heavens. And the first cover he did was of Ruby Bridges being escorted by the authorities into that school in New Orleans. And that was the beginning of the civil rights movement. And Ruby Bridges always referred to Norman Rockwell as the great artist of civil rights. And I'm just going to throw this in for the heck of it. This is my last slide. So John McLean was my grandfather 5 times over. He was a justice with the U.S. Supreme Court. He was from Cincinnati. A lot of my family is from Cincinnati originally, at least on that side. And he was one of the 2 of 9 Supreme Court justices who voted to free Dred Scott. He coined the phrase that became so famous during the Civil War, 1 foot in free territory and freedom forever. And he was a mentor to Abraham Lincoln and to Grant. There's a new book out called Lincoln and His Mentors. And John McLean, who was a co-founder of the Republican Party, which was at that time purely founded for anti-slavery reasons. By the way, the 7 other justices on the Supreme Court all were big slave owners, and they voted to send Dred Scott back to his master. So it was John Maclean and one other who were extreme and radical abolitionists and believed in freedom, but they didn't believe in freedom other than as a spiritual gift, as a gift of the spirit. And I grew up with that heritage. I was sitting around the dining room table. My parents would talk about it. And I went to Cincinnati about 10 years ago and gave a big talk on the legacy of John Maclean for the Cincinnati Women's Club. And they took me to his burial site, which is in downtown Cincinnati. And I was fine with doing that. So this is the new book coming out in November, November 4th, but you can order it now. Pure Unlimited Love, a forward by His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the science of the seven paths to inner peace. And I hope if you get a copy, I hope that it can change your life. Thanks, JD. We're okay. I can stop sharing.
Yeah, stop sharing. I thank you, Stephen. I mean, it's I don't know about you, but I feel, or anyone else, but I feel the love and the joy and the happiness from this massive amount of wisdom that you shared. If you've got a question, feel free to raise your hand. Um, but the most important thing I want to say is you have taken these seven paths and written them as affirmations, in my opinion, and somehow you have magically woven together the ladder of love. And you were the first person to teach me the ladder of love, and I've never forgotten it. Because as a left brain nuclear engineer, math major, I'm like, love, what is love, And so love, you told me 20 years ago, it's compassion, kindness, generosity, and so forth. And so if you could just take 20 seconds, isn't your seven paths seem to have woven together, I lost count, 15 versions of the ladder of love, creativity,
Well,
passion, purpose.
thank you for remembering that. So the structure of the book is that there's this wheel of love, and it's got 10 spokes, and they range widely from uh, forgiveness to M. Scotty Peck's carefrontation to compassion to forgive. It's a wonderful sort of compendium of the everyday ways in which we typically express love. So I get up in the morning pretty early and I meditate for a while, and I know pretty much who I'm going to see over the course of the day here at the medical school. And I know some people have had a hard time because maybe uh, an adolescent has relapsed into addiction, or maybe someone else is struggling because their spouse has gone off and left them, or maybe someone else is struggling because they have a wonderful creative project and they're stuck on it. So my job in leadership is to have a fairly strong sense ahead of time of where people are in life and what expression of love they need. I don't come into this building talking about love, love, love. It's so trivializing. And who knows what people will think about
Well, but I
it.
don't like creativity.
Creativity.
You talk creativity. I mean, how often do we think of that as an expression of love? But the essence of, pure creation, I interviewed many people in my life, what is the source of a great idea? Where Mozart didn't write music, he heard it.
You heard it.
Peter Max watches his hand paint, not knowing what it's doing. Disney gets the vision of Epcot from a dream. This is the
Yeah.
unlimited, the one mind that you speak about, and
Yeah.
that is a form of love. But how often do we think of
We don't.
creativity or passion, following our calling, as
Yeah.
love?
Yeah. That's so true. And, there's a lot to be said about this. It's in the book. But for many people, their creativity, I'll go back to W.H. Auden, uh, that he felt invaded by this incredible energy, and it was underlying his creativity. He was one of the most creative poets, especially in the second half of his life after this experience. Chagall called blue the color of love. And Chagall, to me, was the greatest artist of the 20th century. He wasn't a cubist. He was different. Even Picasso said that guy Chagall must have angels floating around his brain. Couldn't figure him out.
Listen, feel free to hang on if you want. I know we're coming up on our time to leave, and before the end of the hour, I just want to share Stephen is going to be a keynote speaker at our annual ROI of Y conference. And for those that maybe didn't hear, the mission of the Do More Good movement is to empower and educate and amplify purpose-driven leaders who are doing more good, who embrace the values of kindness and empathy, compassion, generosity, because our research from the business perspective is that those companies that embrace the things that Stephen is talking about not only do better, but they do 10, 15 times better.
Yeah.
And so we believe that capitalism isn't the problem, that capitalism is the solution. And remember that Ben Franklin said that capitalism is the proper balance of philanthropy and love and commerce. And that's what we're trying to bring out. We're trying to introduce more business people to people like Stephen to help them open their heart and be more compassionate, great, good leaders. So I put the link to the website in there, and we're honored he's going to be speaker. It's going to be a great conference next year. But if you want to stay on and ask some questions, Stephen, can you stay on a few more minutes?
Sure. I'm good for a half an hour.
Okay. So please open it up to raise your hand or just open your mic and ask a question. I'm not sure who's speaking, but you're garbled. Nick, you've got something to say? Go ahead, Nick.
Yeah, I was wondering what interesting things you've seen on generativity since why good things happen to good people.
Well, generativity is an idea that was originally stated by Erik Erikson, and it was what he used to describe the seventh stage of life. It was good for old folks who are kind of getting near the end, and they want to convey their wisdom to a younger generation. And that's why I was never a big Erik Erikson fan, because I see Ralph laughing. I That's why I wanted to study toddlers with Paul Bloom and others, because generativity is there from the get-go. And if you can allow that to unfold, if you can have educational systems that bring that out and don't just train people to fit in, but to actually come close to their callings. And if people can discover their callings, that's why it's important. And a lot of times they do that through volunteering and trying things out. But if they can hang on to their callings, then they can have that maybe glow quality in their lives professionally and every other way.
For some reason, the sound's only coming through the computer speaker.
Yeah. So I have not written much about generativity except that it's implicit in the whole theory of pure unlimited love over the course of a lifetime.
Yeah, I was wondering. I'd seen some interesting research coming out of one of the mentoring programs here. They researched the mentors. These are college students, and they're seeing generativity there. And
Yeah.
the most interesting thing that I've seen in it is that for some people, it seems to be the act of mentoring itself that unlocks like a potential community builder within. I was wondering if you've ever seen anything like that in
Oh
your
yeah,
work.
very much so. I mean, when you engage in kind giving, emphasis kindness, because if you're just talking about external giving, in a sort of routinized external fashion, it's measurable that the benefits are not as considerable for the giver. But I've always emphasized the benefits of giving for those who receive, but also for those who give, not in a necessarily transactional sense, but in terms of the measurable internal benefits, which are really what my work has been about. A little funny story. Some of my colleagues wrote a wonderful article in one of the psychology journals about widows and widowers who had been married happily. That's important, happily, for many years. And now their spouse has passed away and they're going through a certain amount of grief and bereavement. So, what they found out is that the ones who could self report kind, helping behavior informally in the neighborhood, through their places of worship, through their communities, and also through formalized volunteering, that they were getting through this process more quickly and in a more lasting fashion. So I got a phone call from some group in New York, the New York Society of Widows and Widowers. Would you come in and give a talk about this? So I went in to some hotel in Manhattan, and it was a big conference room. There were a lot of people there. And I gave this talk about the internal benefits of coping with challenges through generativity. And I've always said in life that the secret to success is expanding the canvas. When there's a hard moment, like a Jackson Pollock gob of brown paint on the floor, your job is to expand it out and so it becomes beautiful. And that's generativity. So I was talking about all this, and a guy in the back of the room was frantically waving his hands. And I said, "Sir, may I help you?" And he said, "Yeah, I don't care what you say, buddy. I don't do nothing for nothing." And so, Ralph, I knew I'd been on Route 80 and I was no longer in Cleveland. Okay, I won't say that. Okay.
So, Nick, thanks for your question. We get three hands raised in this order. We'll do Susan, Jane, and then Eric. So, Susan, yeah, thanks for.
Hi.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This has been a beautiful day. I've been giving for a couple of decades, raising kids, volunteering, helping build nonprofits. But now the financial climate around us is pretty brutal. And I would love to keep giving and giving and giving. And now I'm at this crossroads of like, do I just go back and get a regular job? And maybe that's not a question you can answer, but like the spirit's there.
Well, you know, I never looked down upon people who are just getting some regular job to make ends meet, to support themselves and their families. Um, you know, that's the situation people find themselves in. We sometimes have to struggle to follow our callings. And, I've been very fortunate and blessed in life because, I've been teaching in medical schools for a long, long time, since really the 80s. Chicago, Michigan, Case. Stony Brook's been great. Um, and I have to tell you that I've been very grateful for my journey in life. Uh, and and yet, I grew up just doing menial jobs. I worked in a shipyard. I worked in a dog grooming palace, washing dogs. I worked as a land surveyor in college. Um, I've been a clamor. I've been a lot of things that are pretty everyday. And I don't think I come off as somebody who isn't pretty everyday. I don't know what Ralph thinks about that, but thank you, Ralph. Okay. Um, so but if you have a sense of a calling, and I had a sense of a calling early on, if you find it, you want to stick with it if possible. Sometimes you have to mix it up. I mean, I don't call working in medical schools my day job. I mean, my real calling is the Institute and all this work on unlimited love and Sir John and Jane Goodall, all these people. And I've never seen them in this building, and I don't talk about them much. However, what I do in the daytime is closely related
Mhm.
to the Institute. So if you can find that kind of combination, it's one of the reasons I came to Stony Brook from Case Western because I felt, that the president of the university wrote me and she said that she wanted to affect the culture of care at Stony Brook Medical Center and make it more compassionate and more communicative and warmer. And so even though I love living in Shaker Heights, a beautifully integrated inner ring suburb of Cleveland, and I love the Starbucks where I used to see Ralph pretty much every morning. It was great. But I still made the move. It was a difficult move, very painful, because I was putting aside a lot of friendships and my home,
And you
people I
can just
knew.
stack that up there.
But it was in the end, it was worth coming.
Susan, what was the context of your question? I mean, are you asking how do I balance my financial position in giving or
Yeah,
give?
it's about the call. Like I have a calling to compassion, and everything I do is in compassion. But then I also have to make a living.
Yeah.
Right. Well,
And
yeah, and what comes to my mind is, when they always say put the oxygen mask on yourself first. You can't help others if you're not financially secure and healthy. So it's a balance. That's my opinion. You got to take care of yourself.
yeah,
That's not selfish. I don't know if Stephen has anything to
No,
add to
no,
that.
no. I mean, certainly, the definition of love that I offered, the well-being and security of another, is as real or meaningful to you as your own, and sometimes more so. You love that person. So the love of self, not selfishness, but the love of self, the care of the self is key. And in this medical school, we actually won a national award in 2019 from Alpha Omega Alpha for having a curriculum teaching medical students and faculty to care for themselves because the problem of burnout becomes so severe. And people sometimes in the health professions, they feel guilty just to get a primary care appointment and take care of a pain in their side that could become very serious. Or if they have some sort of emotional issue, they kind of hide that away. And so we have what we call reflection rounds to let people reflect together in an empathic and constructive fashion, sharing these kinds of situations. And it revolutionizes the atmosphere in a hospital. So you always got to be taking care of yourself. Don't let it be so overbearing that it precludes you from being compassionate. You can still be empathic and compassionate with everybody you meet. I mean, I'm trying to be that way, sometimes successfully, sometimes not. I can still lose it when the guy on Route 25A stops unnecessarily at a yellow light.
Well,
And I know it's going to take another 10 minutes of my time before I can get up to this Nichols Road institution. So I can sometimes fall full chested on my horn, but I tend not to yell out expletives or go crazy.
thanks, Susan. Thanks, Stephen.
thank
Let's move
you.
to Jane's question. But Jane, while you're unmuting yourself, Stephen, I don't know if it's something in the air or water in Stony Brook, but you need to sprinkle more of that
What
philosophy well, that's what you're doing, right?
I'm
But
doing.
that's what we need more leaders and institutions
Yeah.
practicing these things. Jane Smiley, thank you for being here. What's your question?
I know you,
Hey.
Jane, don't I?
No, I don't believe so,
Okay.
but you do now.
Okay.
Hello. Thank you for being here and presenting on love. My question is related to your comments around freedom and love. And you said that the Hindus promote the idea of freedom. And I guess I wanted you to expand on that a little bit more because I wasn't sure how they're referring to freedom, if they're talking about freedom of speech. And I
Oh,
was thinking, if it's freedom of speech and expressing yourself, how it seems like so divisive right now in our world to allow freedom of speech. It's so hurtful for so many people, and that doesn't feel like love. So I guess how can we balance this freedom of speech with the concept of being able to freely express ourselves?
Yeah,
Thanks.
good point. So be careful of triggering language. I'm very careful of that. Even on that second Rockwell magazine cover, I had one of my more artful colleagues scratch out the N word, which was on the back wall behind Ruby Bridges, because even though I could explain Rockwell and how incredibly deep and magnificent his motivations were, for all I could know, somebody who would see that would be triggered by it, and possibly rightly so. So you have to be careful of your language. That's number one. And number two, um, we cannot have community without freedom of expression. So, for the Hindus, um, the supreme being, as I said, is described as freedom, creativity, and love. And that's why in something like a Big Bang, the universe comes into being. And we are brought into this world in order to relate to that supreme being as expressions of those three qualities. So that's a little bit different than image of God and Christian theology and so forth. But, I spent too much time in Japan and India. By the way, when I was in college, I went to a small college in Portland, Oregon, Reed College. And so Jobs slept on my floor and we read the autobiography of a yogi, just FYI. And then, he was only there for half a year or a year. So then he went off to India to an ashram. And I didn't hear from him we didn't communicate. He became famous, obviously, and very successful. But when I came here from Cleveland in 2008, I went to a high school reunion in New Hampshire. And one of my friends had started a little company in Palo Alto, and he knew Jobs. And I asked him if he could give me Steve Jobs' email, and he said, "I will, but don't tell him where you got it from." So I emailed him, and I said, "I don't know if you remember, but he used to come into my room, and especially when it was raining. It rains a lot in Portland, and he responded, and it was nice." But I'm one of these people who I'm Episcopalian, but I'm also very much appreciative of these great one mind traditions of the East. And freedom is so much a part of that that it's really hard to explain it, but it makes freedom something deep. So may you honor the spirit of freedom. Don't abuse it. In all the Vedic literature, the Upanishadic literature, the Buddhist literature, as soon as you start talking about freedom, suddenly you see the positive version of the Golden Rule coming in. C.S. Lewis wrote a whole book about that called The Abolition of Man. And he quotes all these sources in spiritual traditions of the positive version of the Golden Rule, not the negative version. That just means if you get home tonight and you haven't kicked anybody in the shin, you can feel good about yourself. But we're hoping for a little more. So
Right. And I think as business owners and entrepreneurs that, promoting capitalism, you know, allowing the freedom of expression with your employees for them to be able to give you feedback. I mean, I've found that's something where I've had to walk in love because it can be challenging to hear criticism or different opinions of the way you're doing things or processes. And so I have found where that has benefited me to walk in love of just allowing them to express themselves, even if their views are different than mine. And then from there, just allowing and accepting, and then sometimes walking away and coming back
Sure.
later to discuss, but just allowing them to speak is important for showing love, I think.
That's carefrontation. And you know, the reason I put mirth in my wheel of love is because, as you said earlier, Jane, somehow the atmosphere that we've created in our culture is so divisive and almost venomous. So instead of, I mean, when I was a kid growing up, my very Irish mother and my very British father disagreed on everything politically, but they managed to be hospitable to one another at the table. In fact, my mom would tell a joke to my dad, putting down the English a little bit. So why can't you tell an Englishman a joke on a Saturday night? My dad would draw a blank. He might possibly crack up laughing in church the next day. And then my dad would respond, "What's the Irish definition of hospitality?" And my mother would draw a blank, and dad would say something like, "You make someone feel perfectly at home while you be a wishing they were." So, but anyway, you know, I mean, I believe in mirth and humor, and even in the I came into this building every day during the COVID epidemic, and I never got sick, and I noticed that there was a kind of despondency, and I started telling tasteful, uplifting dad jokes to faculty and students.
Jokes.
Things like this one combined, Ralph, theology and medicine. What do you do if you're an agnostic, you have dyslexia and insomnia? You're up all night wondering about the existence of dog.
Stephen, we've got two more questions I'd like to
Okay.
get to. So, Eric, go ahead.
Yes, and probably not so much as a question, but I experience the peace of God that surpasses all understanding in many extremes and horrible ways. So I've been a volunteer street pastor since 2008.
Mhm.
And in the UK, we volunteer that we walk around the streets of our town until 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning to care, listen, and to help when we can. And so everyone I meet, I know is first loved by God.
Yes.
So if they're first loved by God, then I should also love them. And we meet people in very extreme circumstances, and I can't explain. But we've, on many, many occasions, walked into the middle of many angry, violent, horrible, drunken fights with people using broken bottles and weapons and things as if, and we walk in the middle. And I look for my peace. I don't look for the peace of the people who are in these violent situations. And finding my peace,
Mhm.
it almost feels like I absorb their anger
Mhm.
and they absorb my peace. And it's very much an exchange.
Yeah.
And this has
Well,
happened so many times. And how do you look at somebody and ask them to hand over a knife? It's not a natural and normal thing to do. But if you see somebody who's loved by God first, and they're not a violent person, you search for the good in that person you're looking at,
yeah.
there is the hope. And I can't understand in 17 years of facing all these confrontations how I've never been hurt.
Hmm.
And before I started to do this, you've talked about forgiveness quite a lot. But before I signed up to be a street pastor, because I'm a Christian, the first thing I asked was, if I was punched or stabbed or something, could I forgive that person? And only when I could answer that question in advance and say, yes, if I was punched or stabbed, I can forgive them, was the time that I felt at peace to be able to do the voluntary work that I do.
Mhm.
And where you find peace, it is not in a way that the world sees it. It doesn't make sense to me, even though I've had all this experience. And one of the little thing, a few years ago, I had tested done for cancer, And the doctor phoned up and he said, and you've got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, which is the cancer our friend died from about a year later. So being told that you have choices, the default choice is fear and worry, but then the prayer for the wisdom, the strength, the peace, and the serenity to live with the cancer, whether it's going to be a death sentence or an inconvenience, is powerful, because from the moment of making that prayer, I experienced a profound sense of peace that is beyond my understanding. I made that prayer once, and then the following days, my prayer was, thank you for a day of peace, thank you for a day of peace. And so how we look at life and we see choices, to me, is very profound. I still don't understand how it works, but all I know is that it does.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Eric. It's very profound. And, you're out there at night in a difficult situation, but you are expanding the canvas through love. And that's really, in so many ways, the purpose of life. I'm reminded as you speak of that, I went to a geriatric psychiatric hospital in Mount Vernon, Ohio, with an old an old neurologist, now passed away, Joe Foley, very well-known guy. And there was a unit there, a large unit of people with Down syndrome who had gotten into their 50s and 60s, and they typically, in that age, also have complications with Alzheimer's disease. So we went in there, and their behavior was completely over the top. I mean, they were screaming and yelling, and it was a very challenging moment. And then these wonderful Hindu nurses' aides came in to the unit, and everybody calmed down. It was practically miraculous. And you're talking about miraculousness too. And so Joe Foley and I were so impressed that we invited just two of these, because we didn't want them to get too far away from their clientele or their loved ones. They were really a constituency. So we took two of them to a pizza restaurant in Gambier, Ohio. And when we were eating pizza, we asked them, how is it that you are so caring and so tender and so diligent with these individuals, and when they're around you, they quiet down? And they said, namaste, which means, simply speaking, I honor the divine in you as you honor the divine in me. So that's a greeting in India. Not for too many people does it have that sort of depth meaning, but it meant that for them. And so they were seeing, Eric, what you were seeing, which is that everybody, no matter how obscured, how opaque, they still have within themselves this spiritual quality, which is a sharing in the one mind, in the divine nature. So I really love to hear what you're doing. It's very profound. Thank you very much for.
Yes, thank you, Eric. Thank you
Yes, I
for
also
sharing.
worked for 20 years with Down syndrome as well.
Oh yeah.
Done all
We've
that,
got
yes.
time for one last question. So thank you, Eric. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Phil, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm curious if you're able, you mentioned Steve Jobs, and that made me wonder are you able to identify a currently living public figure who might be able to lead the way, moving love into this vast, huge industry of AI, and how might that be done so that AI can be used for good and not just for profit?
Really deep question and very serious. So, if you Google AI psychosis, there's a very well-known psychiatrist at the UCS, University of California, San Francisco Medical Center. And he's been studying the mentally destructive uses of AI. An AI device does not have what I called earlier emotional or affective empathy, Phil. Now it can have all the cognitive empathy you want. It can, you can say something to AI, I'm struggling with this. And then in its wonderful manner, it can say, well, why don't you think about that? Or why don't you think about this? But it won't always be, as we might call it, salutogenic, health related. Uh, and so there are now on record probably 17 AI adolescent suicides because an adolescent can get engaged deeply as they're already engaged in this kind of genre, and it can take them down into death. And there's another, I was reading an account the other day about a guy in New York who was slightly depressed and he was relying very heavily on AI and he killed himself and his mother. So, it's not that AI has to be that way, but we have to be very, very realistic about its negative potential. And I talk with people in this medical center about it because everything now is laced with AI, even the surgical techniques. But there are AI programs that have a higher probability of accurate differential diagnosis in psychiatry than your average psychiatrist. So this is something to be thinking about. And there's a wonderful guy from the University of Toronto who actually is called the father of AI. And he worked for Google for a while. He quit eventually. And he's come out with a lot of interesting writings about how this may be more destructive than helpful. So I don't have an easy answer. How to connect AI to love is very perplexing. Steven Spielberg did a movie in about 2001 called AI, Artificial Intelligence, and he did the best he could to capture a sort of an AI robot that was capable of at least feigning affective love and compassion. But this is a big deal, and it's not going to be simple, and it may or may not help us get where we want to go.
Yeah. Thanks, Phil, for your question. Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Stephen, for just amazing knowledge and wisdom. You've mentioned so many books. I like making feverish notes of all these books you mentioned, and I can't wait for your book to come out. So it gets released, Pure Unlimited Love, on November 4th. So sign up on Amazon, and we'll have a replay. And everybody who registered will send you an email to the replay. Namaste, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thanks. JD, this is the first time I've given a talk about this book.
Oh,
I was putting those slides together just yesterday. And, it's a great opportunity for me to practice my craft.
well, you did a fantastic job. Yeah.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
everybody. And
Ralph,
have a wonderful weekend.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.